The guests murmured in confusion as Sarah, the bride, stormed out of the church doors, the heavy white gown trailing behind her like a ghost of shattered dreams. She ran, gasping for breath in the suffocating air, her tears blurring her vision as the words echoed in her mind, "David won't show up." That day she thought her story was over, the humiliation engraved deep in her heart, the love turning to ash. But fate had only just begun writing the next chapter of her life. Months later, with her heart still aching, Sarah received news that left her stunned. Not only was she moving forward, but she was carrying the future. 4 tiny lives, her children, growing inside her. What came next was a journey of strength, love, and a surprising reunion that would test the limits of forgiveness. What would Sarah do when the man who had abandoned her returned, staring at the faces of children he couldn't deny were his own? The answer lies in her story. The story begins. Sarah was in the bridal suite, adjusting her veil while her best friend Sophia tried to comfort her. The ceremony was supposed to have started by now. "He loves you, Sarah. He's just running late because he wants everything to be perfect," Sophia said, though even she wasn't fully convinced. But Sarah knew something wasn't right. David wasn't the type to be late. She checked the clock again, her chest tightening, each second feeling like an eternity. Finally, the priest entered, his stern expression confirming Sarah's worst fear. "I'm so sorry, Miss Sarah. We've received word that David won't be coming." Those words hit her like a crushing blow. Sarah felt her legs give way, but she clung to the table. Tears began to streak down her face, smearing her makeup. "It can't be. There must be some mistake," she said, her voice trembling. Without waiting for an answer, Sarah fled the church. The curious gazes of the guests followed her as she hurried down the aisle. The shame was unbearable, but the pain was even worse. When she reached the parking lot, she stopped, desperately searching for David, but he wasn't there. She looked up at the sky, struggling to hold back tears, but all she felt was humiliation and sorrow. Questions swirled in her mind like a storm. Why? Had she done something wrong? Then she remembered their conversation 2 weeks prior. She could still see his cold expression when he held her hand. "Are you sure you want this?" he asked, breaking the silence. "Of course I want this," Sarah replied, surprised. "We love each other, right?" David hesitated, but eventually smiled. It was a fragile smile, one that Sarah didn't recognize as a warning at the time. Back in the present, Sarah sat on the sidewalk, her white dress spreading out around her, tears silently falling down her face. The shame and pain were unbearable. She just wanted to disappear. Across the street, in a car, David watched her. He held his phone in his hand, his mother's words echoing in his mind. "This marriage isn't what you need, David. Think about your future. It won't work." He lowered his head, struggling with guilt. He knew what he had done was unforgivable, but he didn't have the courage to face Sarah or the expectations everyone had placed on him. Sarah wiped away her tears, took a deep breath, and made a decision. She would leave. She wouldn't let anyone see her as a victim. The next day, after the wedding disaster, Sarah left the city. No goodbyes, no explanations, no confrontations. She simply boarded a bus to a distant place, away from everything and everyone. Each mile that passed, the memories of yesterday crushed her more. But she knew she had to move on. Staying wasn't an option. The first few months were hard. Sarah rented a small room in a strange town, started working at a coffee shop, and every day she tried to rebuild her life. But the pain lingered, along with a sense of failure. Everything seemed to be falling apart, until one day an unexpected turn of events would change her life forever. 2 months later, Sarah started to feel different. Morning sickness,
extreme fatigue, and a sense that everything was shifting. She blamed the stress and all the burdens she had been carrying. Until one night, in doubt, she bought a pregnancy test. That night, in the small bathroom of her apartment, Sarah stared at the test result in disbelief. The 2 lines appeared. Her heart raced. She felt a mix of fear and joy. A part of her panicked at the thought of raising a child alone, with no support, no family nearby. But at the same time, a surprising sense of purpose began to flood her. This baby was her second chance, a reason to keep living. The following days were a process of adjustment. Sarah scheduled her first doctor's appointment, and reality began to sink in. But nothing could have prepared her for the moment when the doctor, with a kind smile, looked at the ultrasound screen and said, "Congratulations, Sarah. It's 4.
Four babies," the doctor replied calmly. The world seemed to spin around her. It was beyond anything she had expected, beyond what she thought she could handle. "Can I do this?" she asked, not realizing she had spoken out loud. The doctor just smiled. "Mothers are strong, Sarah. They always find a way to protect and love their children." With the news of her pregnancy, Sarah knew she had to change everything. Her small room was no longer enough. She saved every penny she earned from the coffee shop and was able to rent a modest little house on the outskirts of the city. It was small, but it was enough for her and her future children. Meanwhile, the people around her began to recognize her strength. Despite carrying quadruplets, Sarah continued to work tirelessly, balancing doctor's appointments, work, and preparing her new home. Each small accomplishment was a step forward in her new journey. But there were difficult days, nights when she cried alone, feeling the weight of it all. The doubts, the fears, and the recurring question, if David knew, would he care? She pushed those thoughts away every time they surfaced, focusing only on what needed to be done. The news of her quadruplet pregnancy, as shocking as it was, gave Sarah a newfound strength. She knew that if she had survived everything she had been through, she could face anything. The children would be her priority, and no one, least of all David, could change that. Time passed faster than Sarah had anticipated. Between hospital visits and organizing the house, she barely had time to take it all in. Then one day, when labor arrived, things became complicated, but all 4 children were born healthy. As Sarah held each one in her arms, she felt something she had never experienced before: pure love. That moment erased any remaining doubts. From that point on, she knew she would do whatever it took to protect them. 6 years passed, and Sarah had become accustomed to life as a single mother raising 4 children. The house that had once been quiet was now filled with laughter, noise, and toys scattered everywhere. Each son had his own distinct personality. Ethan was the curious one, always asking questions. Aiden was shy, but incredibly affectionate. Caleb was the funny one, always knowing how to make everyone laugh. Mason was the little leader, always organizing his brothers in their mischievous games. Daily life was exhausting, but Sarah felt fulfilled. She worked tirelessly to provide for her family, taking on various jobs. No matter how hard it got, she never complained. Every smile from her sons reminded her of why she kept moving forward. But life was never predictable. One afternoon, just like any other, when she was taking her kids to the park, Sarah saw someone she never thought she would see again. She froze, her heart racing. There was David. He was sitting on a bench talking to someone, but his expression shifted the moment his gaze met Sarah's.
He looked over at the 4 children playing nearby.
And the resemblance between them was undeniable. The reunion that Sarah had feared had come. Sarah stood there, her gaze fixed on David, while the children played carefree on the playground. He was only a few meters away, but to her, time seemed to stop. Everything seemed still. David stared at her, but quickly turned his eyes toward the children running on the grass, laughing and racing toward the slide. The resemblance between them and him was unmistakable. Sarah felt her heart race. She needed to leave before David could come any closer. She quickly grabbed her bag, trying to hide the anxiety building inside her. "Ethan, Aiden, Caleb, Mason, let's go. It's time to go home," she said, her voice slightly higher than usual. The boys immediately protested, of course wanting more playtime, but Sarah's firm tone was enough to convince them. They began gathering up the toys scattered across the park, and Sarah urged them to hurry. But before she could take another step, a strong voice called out behind her, calling her name. Sarah froze. That voice was familiar, and the weight of doubt made her stomach tighten. She slowly turned around, facing David's intense gaze. He looked confused, but there was something different in his eyes, surprise and disbelief. "David?" she whispered, trying to remain calm but failing. "Are they your kids?" He pointed at the boys who were still absorbed in their toys. Sarah hesitated, her face turning red. She knew she couldn't avoid this conversation forever. "Yes, David, they're my children," she answered, struggling to keep her voice steady. David moved closer, his eyes flickering between her and the children as if trying to process the information. "How old are they?" he asked, though the answer was already clear. Sarah bit her lip, trying to stay composed. "They're 6 years old." David's expression shifted. It was as if he'd been punched in the stomach. His mouth opened as if to say something, but closed again, still trying to absorb the situation. "Are they your kids?" The question came out as a whisper. Sarah felt the ground beneath her feet give way. She had prepared herself for this moment for years, but now that it had arrived, she found herself at a loss for words. She decided to be honest. "Yes, David, they are your children." The silence that followed was almost unbearable. David ran a hand through his hair, a nervous gesture Sarah remembered all too well. He turned to look at the boys, who were now watching her with curious eyes, as if sensing something important was happening. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked, his voice thick with a mix of anger and hurt. "You abandoned me," Sarah replied, crossing her arms defensively. "You left without an explanation. I was alone, humiliated, and pregnant. What did you think I was supposed to do?" David blinked a few times, struggling to find words, but fell silent. He knew she was right. He had no justification for his actions. "I need to meet them," he said, breaking the silence. Sarah instinctively took a step back. "It's not that simple, David. They don't know who you are." "Why not? I'm their father." Those words echoed in Sarah's mind, stirring a mixture of anger and pain. She stepped forward and locked eyes with him. "Father, you have no idea what it means to be a father, David. You weren't there when I stayed up all night not knowing how I was going to pay the bills. You weren't there when I had to take care of 4 kids at once, alone. Father, don't make me laugh." David swallowed hard, but stood his ground. He knew Sarah was right, but he couldn't let this conversation end like this. "I know I was wrong, but that doesn't change the fact that they are my children. I have the right to know them." "That's true," Sarah said with a bitter laugh. "You gave up that right when you left me at the altar." As they argued, Ethan, the most curious of the 4 brothers, walked over and tugged at his mother's skirt. "Mom, who's this man?" he asked, his big brown eyes wide with curiosity. Sarah looked down at her son, her heart tightening. Before she could answer, David knelt in front of the boy, his face softening for the first time since he had come close. "Hello, little man. My name is David," he said, offering a tentative smile. Ethan tilted his head, studying the stranger. "Do you know my mom?" David chuckled softly, glancing at Sarah before answering. "Yes, I do." Sarah took a deep breath, gently pushing Ethan away. "Go play with your brother, sweetheart. I'll be right out." Ethan hesitated for a moment, but then obeyed. Sarah turned back, her expression hardening as her gaze returned to David. "You can't just show up and expect everything to be solved right now. It doesn't work that way." David shook his head. "I'm not asking for everything to be fine right now, but I'm not leaving, Sarah. Not this time." A wave of anxiety surged through Sarah. She knew David wasn't the type to give up easily. After that day, Sarah returned home with the boys, her heart heavy as she tucked them into bed. She couldn't stop thinking about what was to come. While she wanted to protect her children, Sarah knew that keeping David away was no longer possible now that he knew the truth. Not far away, David sat in his luxurious apartment, staring out the window. He thought about the boys, about Sarah, and about how things might have been different if he had chosen another path years ago. For the first time in a long time, he felt the need to make things right. Sarah barely had time to recover from the unexpected reunion with David when, just a few days later, there was a knock at her door. She opened it, and once again it was him. This time he looked even more determined, his face marked with regret and resolve. "Sarah, we need to talk," he said plainly. "We have nothing to talk about, David," she replied, crossing her arms. "I'm not leaving until we talk," he said, his voice firm. The tension between them was palpable, thickening the air in the room. Sarah knew she couldn't avoid this conversation forever. Before she could close the door, Ethan appeared in the hallway, looking on with curiosity. "Mom, it's the guy from the park." Sarah forced a smile on her son, but David immediately seized on the moment. "Hey, little man. I'm David." Ethan tilted his head, studying the stranger. But Sarah quickly intervened. "Ethan, go back to your room. I'll be right out." When Ethan was gone, Sarah turned back to face David, irritation clear on her face. "You can't just show up here and talk to my kids like that." "Sarah, they are my children. I have the right to know them," David responded, his voice steady. "Yes, they are your children," Sarah said with a bitter laugh. "But you gave up that right when you left me at the altar. I've raised them on my own. You have no idea what it's like to lose sleep, sacrifice everything for them, and now you think you can just show up like nothing happened?" David took a deep breath, clearly attempting to remain composed. He knew Sarah was right about many things, but he also knew he couldn't give up. "I know I was wrong. I'm not trying to justify what I did, but that doesn't change the fact that they are my children." Sarah's heart tightened. She wanted to protect them from everything, but she also knew that David wasn't someone who gave up easily. "What do you want?" she asked, her voice weary. "I want to know them. I want to spend time with them. Is that too much to ask?" He looked at her with sincerity in his eyes. "Too much? They don't even know who you are, and I won't let you disrupt their lives," she answered firmly. David fell silent for a moment, before saying the words that Sarah had been dreading the most. "If you won't give me this chance, I'll take it to court." Those words hit Sarah like a punch to the gut. The silence that followed his departure seemed heavier than ever. He had made it clear that if she didn't allow him to be a part of the boys' lives, he would use every legal resource at his disposal to claim his rights as their father. Sarah tried to stay calm, but she knew the battle ahead would be a difficult one. A few days later, the sun rose, and David had filed a lawsuit for shared custody. Sarah felt the ground beneath her feet disappear. Her first reaction was anger. He had been absent for 6 years, and now he wanted the right to be their father? It seemed absurd to her. In desperation, Sarah sought help. The first person she turned to was Olivia, an old friend and a seasoned lawyer. Sitting in Sarah's small kitchen, they discussed her options. "Sarah, we need to be realistic. He has money, resources, and a powerful legal team. But you have something he doesn't: a history of commitment. You've been there for the kids every day."
"So, if that's not enough, what do we do?" Sarah asked, her hands trembling as she held her coffee cup. "It will be enough. We'll fight with everything we've got. The first step is to build a defense strategy. We'll gather evidence, testimonies, anything necessary to prove you're the best person to care for them." Sarah nodded, but the weight of the upcoming battle still pressed heavily on her heart. She knew she had to protect her children at all costs. When the initial hearing arrived, Sarah entered the courtroom with Olivia by her side. On the other side, David stood with his lawyer and, surprisingly, Jessica, his fiancée. A surge of anger rose within Sarah when she saw her. Jessica looked completely at ease, as if this were just a social gathering. David's lawyer began with the argument, emphasizing that David had the financial means to provide the boys with a better life, quality education, financial stability, and a safe environment. As he spoke, Sarah's chest tightened. The words were polished and well prepared, but she knew the reality was different. When it was Olivia's turn, she stepped forward with clear confidence. "Your Honor, my client has spent her life caring for her children. She has raised them on her own, enduring hardships that most people would struggle to bear. Mr. David may have financial resources, but Sarah has something far more valuable: a bond built through years of sacrifice, love, and unwavering devotion." The judge listened attentively to both sides, and after the hearing, decided that further investigation was necessary before making a ruling. He ordered a social worker to visit both Sarah and David's homes to assess their living conditions. After the hearing, David approached Sarah in the hallway. He looked tired but still determined. "I don't want to take the kids away from you, Sarah. I just want to be a part of their lives," he said, his voice calm. "You say that now, but you're the one who took this to court. That's not the action of someone who wants to resolve things peacefully," she retorted, her voice filled with anger. Jessica appeared behind him, placing her hand on his shoulder. "We just want to make sure the boys get what they deserve," she said with a cold smile. Sarah's blood boiled. "What they deserve is stability and love, the things I've always given them. I don't need advice from you, Jessica." Without waiting for a response, Sarah turned on her heel, ignoring the hollow feeling that the fight was far from over. In the days that followed, tensions continued to rise. Jessica started showing up more frequently in the boys' lives. At first, she attended their school events, always dressed to perfection, smiling at other parents and trying to befriend the teachers. Then rumors began circulating that Sarah was an irresponsible mother, clearly a story Jessica had intentionally spread. The situation worsened as the rumors reached the media. Articles began to appear, painting David as a devoted father trying to make amends, while Sarah was depicted as a rigid, unwilling mother who refused to share the responsibility of raising their children. Sarah felt the public's judgment, but she was determined not to give up. Olivia, however, noticed that Jessica's interference went beyond mere gossip. In a conversation, she shared her growing suspicions. "Jessica's not just trying to help him, she's after something. She has her own agenda. David may not see it, but she's manipulating the situation to make sure you lose this case. You think she wants more than that? Sarah asked, surprised. I'm sure. If she can push you out, she'll have complete control over David. This isn't about love, it's about power, Olivia asserted. Sarah knew Olivia was right. Jessica was a dangerous player, and underestimating her would be a grave mistake. The social worker's visit was another tense moment. Sarah prepared the house meticulously, making sure everything reflected the fact that her children were happy and well cared for. During the interview, the boys spoke freely about their daily routines, their games, and the love they received from their mother. The social worker seemed impressed by Sarah's dedication. But Sarah knew the social worker would also be visiting David. At David's house, the setting was entirely different. Jessica had arranged everything to look flawless. The boys' room was immaculate, filled with expensive toys they'd never seen before. During the interview, David tried to appear at ease, but Jessica's tight control over everything, along with her prepared responses, caught the attention of the social worker. Her behavior raised suspicions. When the report was submitted, no final decision had been made, but Sarah felt a small victory as she realized the truth about Jessica was starting to surface. Nevertheless, the pressure on her was far from over. David remained adamant that he wanted to be part of the boys' lives, while Jessica did everything she could to undermine Sarah. The battle was far from over, and Sarah understood she had to give everything she had to protect her children.
The day of the trial arrived. The night before, Sarah couldn't sleep. She worried about her children, their future, and what lay ahead. As she entered the courtroom with Olivia, she took a deep breath, trying to maintain composure in the packed room. Dozens of eyes were on her, but Sarah stood tall, resolute. This was not the time to show weakness. Across the room, David sat beside Jessica and his lawyer. He appeared calm, but Sarah knew he was anxious. Jessica, on the other hand, exuded confidence. Every gesture, glance, and posture seemed to announce that she was sure of her victory. The trial began with the judge reviewing the report submitted by the social worker. Sarah listened attentively as Olivia presented her defense, emphasizing the years Sarah had dedicated to raising the children. It was a story of sacrifice and unconditional love, an undeniable truth that Sarah knew better than anyone. But when David's lawyer spoke, the atmosphere shifted. He argued that David had the financial means to provide a better life for the boys, painting a picture of stability, comfort, and opportunity, things he claimed Sarah couldn't provide to the same degree. Hearing this, Sarah's throat tightened. She knew David's argument was strong, but she also understood that the emotional bond she shared with her children was something money could never buy. When it was David's turn to be questioned, Olivia stood up, adjusted her blazer, and fixed her determined gaze. "Mr. David, can you tell us why you chose to leave Sarah 6 years ago?" David hesitated. The silence in the room seemed to freeze before he answered, his voice soft. My mother convinced me it wasn't the right time. She said the marriage would be a mistake, that I needed to focus on my career." A murmur spread throughout the room. Sarah felt her face flush with anger. David's words confirmed her worst fear. He hadn't made the decision himself. Olivia seized the moment, asking again, "So you abandoned Sarah just before the wedding because of your mother's influence, correct?" David took a deep breath, clearly uncomfortable. "Yes, but the final decision was mine. I listened to what she said." Olivia looked him in the eye, unflinching. "What about Jessica? Did she play a role in that decision?" David blinked, caught off guard by the question. He glanced at Jessica, who maintained a neutral expression, though her eyes betrayed a hint of unease. He shook his head. "No, Jessica had nothing to do with it."
Olivia stepped back, but Sarah felt there was still something unspoken. Mentioning Jessica had introduced a tension that no one wanted to address at this moment. When Sarah took the witness stand, the atmosphere in the courtroom shifted again. She spoke about the sacrifices she had made, how she had raised the children alone, and the love she had for them. "I've done everything I could to give my children a happy and safe life. I may not have much, but I've always given them my all. They are the reason I keep going every day." Sarah's words brought many in the room to tears. Even David seemed momentarily unsettled, but Jessica couldn't hide her unease, whispering something to David's lawyer. Sensing the tension rising, the judge called for a recess. When the trial resumed, Olivia requested to call a new witness. The door to the courtroom opened, and someone Sarah hadn't seen in years entered. Lily, the former housekeeper of the David family. She walked slowly, leaning on a cane, but her eyes were resolute. David tensed, while Jessica turned her face away, avoiding eye contact. Lily took the stand and began recounting for years of service to the David family. She was calm, but each word she spoke carried weight. David's mother manipulated this whole situation. She convinced him that Sarah wasn't good enough for their family. She used his fears against him, telling him that marriage would ruin his career, and that Sarah didn't have the social standing they expected. Sarah felt her heart tighten as she listened. Though she had always suspected this, hearing it officially was more painful than she had imagined. Lily went on to describe the private conversations she had overheard, and how David's mother controlled every aspect of his life. But then Lily paused and said something even more shocking. Jessica is involved too. She was close to David's mother and supported the decision that he should stay away from Sarah. She encouraged him to do so. Silence fell over the courtroom. David turned to Jessica, his face pale, as if unable to believe what he had just heard. "That's not true." Jessica jumped to her feet, reacting violently. The judge struck the gavel to restore order.
David looked at Jessica again, suspicion creeping into his gaze. "You knew about all this?" he asked, his voice low but filled with doubt. Jessica tried to deny it, but the anxiety in her eyes betrayed her. The witness was allowed to leave, but the impact of her testimony lingered. The trial was paused while the judge reviewed the new information. Sarah left the courtroom with Lily beside her, trying to process everything that had just happened. The pain of the past few years was now being acknowledged, but Sarah knew the fight wasn't over. Down the hallway, David stood still, lost. He looked adrift, as though the ground had fallen out beneath him. Jessica tried to pull him along, but he pushed her away, clearly shaken. As Sarah walked by, she heard Jessica and David arguing. Though their words were muffled, Sarah could tell everything was falling apart between them. Despite the joy of the truth beginning to surface, Sarah knew the battle was far from over. After the upheaval in court, everything seemed to change. David became different, and Sarah couldn't ignore the shift. He began showing up regularly for supervised visits, always bringing special gifts for the boys. These weren't expensive toys, but thoughtful presents that showed real effort. A book Ethan loved, a soccer ball for Caleb, a set of colored pencils for Aiden, and a puzzle Mason adored. At first, the boys were cautious, but David's patience gradually paved the way for a real connection. He listened to them, joined in their games, and even sat on the floor to help them with puzzles or drawing. Sarah watched from a distance, always alert, but she couldn't deny the laughter in the boys' voices was genuine, without any guard. One afternoon, David brought a kite to teach the boys how to fly it. Sarah couldn't help but watch more closely. The wind was perfect, and the boys ran around the park trying to keep the kite in the air, while David cheered them on. Caleb, always the most competitive, managed to keep the kite up the longest and yelled with joy. David gave him a big hug, and Sarah saw something she never imagined. David was truly happy. Over time, Sarah noticed that David's efforts weren't temporary.
He started taking an interest in the boys' daily lives, asking about their school, friends, and even the small difficulties they faced. He took Aiden to painting class, encouraged Mason as he tackled difficult words, and praised Ethan when he made progress in math games. These moments weren't grand, but they showed David was truly present. Still, Sarah remained cautious. She knew that no matter how hard David tried, the disappointments of the past couldn't easily be forgotten. But despite everything, the change was undeniable.
One evening, as Sarah was cleaning up the kitchen after dinner, David approached and began helping her in silence. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, almost a whisper. "Thank you for giving me the chance to be a part of the boys' lives. I know I don't deserve it." Sarah paused, still holding a plate, thinking for a moment. She wanted to say something sarcastic, remind him there was still so much that needed fixing, but as she looked at him, she saw sincerity in his eyes. He wasn't the confident, arrogant David of the past anymore. He was a man trying to do what was right, even if it might be too late. "As long as they're happy, that's what matters," Sarah responded, turning back to the sink. But deep down, she knew she was happy too. Watching the boys laugh and play, over time, David's presence had become more natural to them. Ethan was the first to casually call him Dad during a game. David froze for a moment, clearly moved, but he didn't make a big deal out of it. He just smiled and continued playing ball with the kids. Soon enough, the other boys followed Ethan's lead, and Sarah realized something significant was happening. Even though this relationship was evolving, Sarah didn't lose her independence. She continued to care for the boys on her own, making sure her role as their mother was respected. She was surprised to realize that David understood this and never crossed the boundaries she had set. He helped, but didn't interfere. One peaceful evening, David brought over a photo album. He handed it to Sarah and explained that it contained childhood moments he wanted to share with the boys. Sarah flipped through the pages while David explained each photo, and the boys listened attentively. It was a simple moment, but it made Sarah realize that David wasn't just trying with the boys, he was trying with her too. While all of this was unfolding, Jessica couldn't accept this change. After the revelations in court, she had lost most of her influence over David, which made her furious. It wasn't just rejection, it was the public humiliation. She couldn't stand seeing David build a new relationship with Sarah and the boys while she was being pushed aside. Jessica began planning her next move. For weeks, she gathered information, pulling strings behind the scenes to create a plan that would disrupt the fragile peace forming between them. In her mind, Sarah was to blame for everything, and the boys were obstacles she needed to remove in order to win back David. As Sarah and David began to build a friendship-like relationship, and the boys grew accustomed to their father's presence, Jessica began to act. One day, Sarah received a call from an unfamiliar number. On the other end was a cold voice. "Do you really think this peace will last? Wait and see what's coming." Sarah instantly recognized the voice. Her heart raced, but she refused to show fear. She hung up without responding and walked back into the living room where the boys were playing with David. She knew Jessica wouldn't give up easily, but this time Sarah was ready to fight.
Meanwhile, Jessica continued her scheming, determined to unravel the relationship between David, Sarah, and the boys. To her, the court's decision was temporary, and she was willing to do anything to break them apart. The days spent sharing time between David and the boys began to form a new routine. Sarah, ever vigilant, allowed him to spend time with the boys under her supervision. David never complained about the conditions she set. He seemed genuinely determined to prove that he could be a stable presence in their lives. At first, Sarah kept her emotional distance. She always watched David closely when he interacted with the boys, staying alert, but over time, it became clear that David was making a real effort to change. He didn't just play with the boys, but paid attention to the small details. He helped Ethan build a robot for his school project, taught Caleb how to kick a soccer ball accurately, encouraged Mason to conquer his fear of heights on the playground, and praised Aiden's drawings, carefully storing them in a portfolio he always carried. One afternoon, while the boys were playing outside, David offered to help Sarah cook dinner. She hesitated for a moment, but eventually agreed. He seemed clumsy as he chopped vegetables, but he didn't give up. "I never imagined you'd be in the kitchen," Sarah remarked, unable to hide the sarcasm in her voice. David laughed, continuing to chop the carrots awkwardly. "I've never had to do this before, but I think it's time I learned, don't you think?" Sarah watched him for a long moment before returning to stirring the soup. There was something different about him, something she couldn't ignore. Despite her urge to remain cautious, she couldn't deny that his simple gestures and patience with the boys were slowly shifting her perception of him. That afternoon, David surprised everyone by pulling out a guitar he had brought along. He sat on the sofa, the boys gathered around, and began to play. The simple yet precise notes filled the room. He sang a children's song, causing the boys to burst into laughter, especially when he stumbled over the lyrics. Standing in the kitchen doorway, Sarah caught herself smiling unexpectedly. It had been a long time since she had seen the boys so relaxed and joyful. Over the weeks, the boys had begun to bond with David in ways Sarah hadn't anticipated. Caleb, the quietest of the bunch, started asking when his dad would be back. Aiden, the artistic one, loved showing David his drawings, while Ethan almost daily invited him to play games. Mason, the shy one, still followed David around, mimicking his movements as if wanting to be just like him. The change was undeniable, yet Sarah continued to wrestle with her emotions. A part of her felt joy seeing her children make memories with their father, but another part still feared everything
could come crashing down. David seemed to have changed, but would it last? Could she forgive him and let him get closer? One morning, while they were at the park, David sat next to Sarah on a bench. The boys ran around, tossing a frisbee to one another. He sighed, looking at her seriously. "Thank you for giving me the chance to stay here. I know it wasn't easy." Sarah didn't look at him, still focused on the boys, but she responded earnestly. "It's not about trust, David. It's about the kids. They need stability, and I couldn't risk you disappearing again." David nodded, understanding. "I get it. But I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere." Despite her lingering doubts, Sarah realized that, so far, he had kept every promise he made since returning. Perhaps, just perhaps, he was truly determined to be a present father. One evening, as she was tucking the boys into bed, David sat on the floor of their room holding an old photo album he had brought along. The boys were curious to learn more about their father's childhood, and he was eager to share. "When I was little, I loved building things," he began, flipping through the album. "There was one time my dad gave me a tool set, and I spent a whole week building a little house in the yard. Of course, it collapsed after the first rain, but it was the most fun I ever had." The boys laughed, and Ethan asked, "Can you build something with us?" David smiled. "Of course, we'll start this weekend." As he continued to share stories, one memory caught Mason's attention. David pointed to a picture of himself with a construction toy, and Mason was completely captivated. He began asking how the toy worked, and David patiently explained every detail. From the doorway, Sarah could see the light in Mason's eyes and felt that a special moment was unfolding. After the boys had fallen asleep, Sarah walked in to turn off the lights. David was still sitting on the floor, gazing at the album with a nostalgic smile. "Thank you for this," he said without looking up. "They're giving me something I didn't know I needed." Sarah didn't respond right away. She simply nodded and stepped out. But deep inside, she knew something was shifting within her,
Perhaps it was time to reconsider what she had once thought impossible: forgiving him. The next morning, David showed up with tools and materials to build a small playhouse for the boys. The backyard quickly filled with the sound of laughter and the clumsy thwack of a hammer.
As the four of them worked together. From the porch, Sarah couldn't stop smiling. This wasn't just a project. It was a symbol of something greater that was slowly taking shape. Though progress was being made, Sarah held herself back. She knew Jessica hadn't completely faded from the picture, and at any moment, something could happen that might shatter the fragile pieces they were putting together. But for now, she decided to enjoy this moment. That evening, after the boys were asleep, Sarah reflected on all the changes over the past few weeks. David was no longer the man she once knew. He still had flaws, but it seemed like he was genuinely committed to being part of their lives. Perhaps it was time for her to lower her guard, even if just a little. Meanwhile, Jessica, enraged by the growing closeness between David and Sarah, continued plotting her next move. To her, this connection was a direct threat to everything she had built with David. This time, she was determined not to lose him. The days passed, and the atmosphere in Sarah's home began to shift. She and David unexpectedly reached a friendly understanding. Though emotional barriers still lingered, their conversations became more natural, and the moments shared with the boys revealed that something was changing. Unlike before, David now showed patience and sincerity, making an effort to be a present father without being forceful. One afternoon, while Sarah was preparing lunch, David walked into the kitchen holding an envelope. "Sarah, can we talk for a minute?" She looked at him, maintaining her distance, but nodded. He placed the envelope on the table without saying a word. When he finally spoke, his tone was calmer than she had expected. "I know you've turned me down before, but this time is different. I want you to take this," he said, pushing the envelope toward her. Sarah opened the envelope to find a check inside. The amount was enough to cover a few months' worth of bills and expenses for the boys. She immediately shook her head. "David, I don't need this. I've always managed to take care of the kids on my own, and I'll continue to do so." He extended his hand as if surrendering, but his gaze remained steadfast. "I know you can do it, Sarah. I know you've worked hard to give them everything, but this isn't just about money. It's about me really wanting to be part of their lives. I don't want this to be a burden on you."
Sarah was silent for a moment, contemplating his words. The David of the past would have handed over the money arrogantly, as if it were the solution to all problems. But now there was something different. It wasn't contempt, but humility. "I'll think about it," she finally replied, folding the check and placing it back into the envelope. David accepted her answer without pressing further, and that surprised Sarah. He was genuinely learning to respect the boundaries she had set. Over time, David's efforts became more apparent. He didn't just help financially, but also actively participated in the boys' daily lives. He drove them to school, helped with their homework, and even learned from Sarah how to handle small crises, like tantrums or broken toys. For Sarah, it was a shock to see someone who once seemed so distant now becoming so involved. One evening, after a long day, David and Sarah sat on the porch while the boys slept. The moonlight gently illuminated the backyard, where tools from building the playhouse were scattered. "I never imagined I'd be here," David spoke, breaking the silence. Sarah glanced at him, curious. "You mean here? With me? With the kids? For years, I only focused on work and other people's expectations, without realizing what truly mattered.
Now that I'm trying to make things right, I keep asking myself why it took so long. Sarah crossed her arms, leaning against the doorframe. Sometimes, we only realize what's important when we've almost lost everything. David nodded, but there was something deeper in his expression. He hesitated for a moment before continuing. Sarah, I need to tell you what happened at the altar. Sarah tensed up. She had carried the pain of that day for years, and while some wounds had begun to heal, others still throbbed with hurt. Still, she nodded, signaling for him to continue. My mom didn't just convince me to call off the wedding. She stopped, taking a deep breath. She threatened to cut off all financial support. She said if I married you, I'd have to figure everything out on my own. So, you left me because you were afraid of losing her money?
It wasn't just about the money, he quickly replied. It was everything. She controlled every aspect of my life. I was a coward, Sarah. I didn't want to face that, so I ran. I know this doesn't excuse what I did, but you deserve to know the truth. Sarah felt a mix of anger and sympathy, the pieces of the puzzle falling into place. But that didn't make the past hurt any less. You should have told me back then, she said, her voice catching. We could have faced it together. I would have always stood by you. I know, David said, his gaze full of regret. But I was young and foolish. I made the wrong decision, and I've been paying for it every day since. Silence enveloped them, but Sarah felt something inside herself crack. It wasn't a truth that could erase all the painful years, but it was, at least, a step forward. A small step, maybe, but still a step. She looked at him, her expression cautious. I don't know if I can ever fully forgive you, David, but at least now I know what really happened. He nodded, accepting her words with humility. That's all I can ask for. The next morning, as the boys ran to hug David upon seeing him, Sarah stood from a distance, watching. For the first time in years, she felt that something was genuinely changing for the better. There was still a long way to go, but perhaps, just perhaps, this family was beginning to reunite. The courtroom was crowded once again. Sarah arrived early, tightly gripping the hand of Olivia, her attorney and close friend. She took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. Ever since learning the truth about being abandoned at the altar, she no longer felt so lost, but she wasn't ready to forgive David completely. The tension between them had eased, but the burden of the legal battles still weighed heavily on her. David arrived with his lawyer. There was something different about him today. He seemed more serious, more focused. He was no longer the man Sarah had once known. Jessica, on the other hand, was clearly absent. Her absence was noticeable, though no one asked why. Sarah guessed that, after the earlier revelations, Jessica had chosen to step back to avoid further embarrassment. The judge entered, and the trial began. Both sides' attorneys presented their final arguments in turn. Olivia, ever sharp, emphasized the emotional bond Sarah had built with the boys and how she was the only constant presence in their lives, while David's lawyer argued that he was now committed to being an active father and his involvement was essential to the children's development. When David was called to testify, Sarah watched him intently. He spoke calmly, acknowledging his past mistakes and taking responsibility for his choices. He admitted Sarah's doubts, but expressed his determination to regain her and the children's trust. I don't expect Sarah to forgive me right away, he said, but I am here because I want to be the father my children deserve, and I won't give up. David's words echoed in the room, and Sarah felt a wave of emotion rise within her, though she kept her composure. It was still hard to fully believe his intentions, but he seemed sincere. When it was Sarah's turn to speak, she stood, adjusting her dress, her hands trembling, yet her voice remained steady. For the past 6 years, I've done everything for my children. I've raised them on my own, faced challenges that only a single mother would understand. They are my absolute priority, and I will always do what's best for them. If that means allowing David to be a part of their lives, I am willing to consider it. But let me be clear, my trust will not be given easily." The judge listened attentively, weighing both sides. After several hours of deliberation, he returned with his decision. Primary custody would be granted to Miss Sarah, but Mr. David would be allowed frequent visitation and active involvement in raising the children. Both parties were ordered to work together to ensure the best development for the children. Sarah felt a mixture of relief and unease. It was the fairest decision, but she still worried about what this would mean in the long term. David, on the other hand, seemed grateful. He looked at Sarah with a small smile, which she returned with a brief nod. After the trial, as everyone began leaving the courtroom, Jessica appeared unexpectedly, as if she had one last word to say to maintain a shred of control. She stood there, in a dark dress that seemed to mirror her mood, her face stern, her eyes fixed on David. "Do you really think you can become the perfect father?" she asked, her tone so laced with sarcasm it almost pierced the tense air. David looked up, meeting her gaze with a calm expression. "I will try, and that's what matters," he replied, his voice deep but firm. She took a step closer, her hands clenched, as if trying to hold on to some last piece of dignity. "Try?" She nearly spat the word. "Trying doesn't make up for what you've destroyed, David." David remained silent, his eyes unwavering. She scoffed, but there was a bitterness in her laugh.
Fine then. Good luck. Now you have the freedom you wanted. Take it. She turned and walked away, the sharp sound of her high heels echoing coldly across the courtroom floor, not looking back, as if closing a chapter in her life. Watching Jessica's retreating figure, David sighed. His shoulders heavy, but his gaze brightened with a new determination. His fight wasn't over, but with Jessica's departure, he knew the path ahead, though difficult, was clearer. For Sarah, it was a relief. Without Jessica's interference, things could finally move forward without being manipulated or dramatized. That same day, David arrived at Sarah's house. He wanted to see the boys, but he also felt the need to talk to her. When he arrived, the boys ran up to hug him, their warm embraces signaling that they were becoming accustomed to their father's presence. Sarah, however, stood silently in the kitchen, watching from a distance. Once the boys had gone to their room, David approached. He seemed hesitant yet determined. "Sarah, can I talk to you for a moment?" he asked. She nodded and led him into the living room. They sat on the couch, and he began. "I want to thank you for giving me the opportunity to be a part of the kids' lives. I know it hasn't been easy for you, but there's one more thing I need to say." Sarah furrowed her brow, both curious and guarded. "What is it?" David took a deep breath before responding. "Sarah, I still love you. I've always loved you. I know it might be too late to say this now, but I want you to know." His words left Sarah momentarily speechless. She looked at him, trying to process what he had just said. For all these years, she had carried the pain of abandonment, but she couldn't forget the old feelings either. In this moment, she felt a deep internal conflict. "David, I don't know what to say," she replied honestly. "So much has happened, this isn't something that words can fix." "I know," he answered, a sad smile on his face. "I'm not expecting anything from you. I just want you to know. And if one day you're ready to think about something beyond what's happened, I'll be here." Sarah remained silent, and David didn't press further. He stood up, wished her a good night, and left. As he walked away, Sarah felt a swirl of emotions. On one hand,
She was relieved to finally hear the truth, but on the other, she knew there was so much left to work through. She looked at the boys playing in the living room and decided that, for now, her focus would be on them. David was trying to make amends, and perhaps, in time, she would consider what he had said. But her priority was to protect and raise her children. Months passed since the final court hearing, and Sarah and David's routine began to shift. He became more and more present, not only in the boys' lives, but in Sarah's daily life as well. Their relationship, which initially revolved around the children, slowly began to evolve. Casual lunches, late-night conversations, and shared moments with the kids became natural, something neither of them thought could happen. One day, during a trip to the park while the boys played on the slides, David approached Sarah. He seemed nervous, a rare sight for him. "Sarah, I've been thinking a lot about us, about all of this," he began, his voice uncertain. She looked at him, waiting for him to continue. "What is it, David?" "Should we try again? Not for the kids, but because I want to. I want to prove to you that I can be the man you deserve." Sarah stayed silent for a moment, her eyes watching the children play in the distance. Over the past months, the time spent together had shown her that David had truly changed. He had become humbler, more patient, and even though the wounds still lingered, there was something inside her that felt it might be worth giving him another chance. "It's not going to be easy, David," she finally spoke. "There's still a lot we need to work through." He nodded, offering a small, hopeful smile. "I know, but I'm willing to do whatever it takes." The following months marked a new beginning. David and Sarah started to rebuild their relationship, one that was now more mature, with the children at the center of their lives. The small gestures became more meaningful. A dinner he cooked after a long day, a supportive message she sent when he faced work challenges, and those simple moments when they laughed together in the backyard as the kids played. One day, David took Sarah and the boys on a picnic in a meadow outside the city. The sun was warm, the sky clear with not a cloud in sight, and a light breeze blew through the meadow. As the boys ran through the flowers, David told Sarah to take a walk with him. He was holding something in his hand, but remained silent, not revealing what it was. When they reached a quiet spot with a stunning view of the flower field, David stopped and looked deeply into her eyes. "Sarah, you've shown me what true love is, not just for me, but for our kids. You're the reason I want to be a better man, a better father. I want this second chance to last forever. Will you marry me?" He opened a small box, revealing a simple yet beautiful ring that seemed to reflect the sincerity in every word he spoke. Sarah felt tears welling up in her eyes. For so long she had imagined what she would do if such a moment ever came. But now, in this moment, the answer was clear. "Yes, David, I will." The boys, from a distance, saw what was happening and ran over, shouting in delight. Ethan was the first to ask, "Mom, are you going to get married? Will we be a real family?" Sarah smiled, kneeling down to hug her children. "Yes, my loves, we will be a family." In the months that followed, the preparations for the wedding were filled with laughter and humorous moments, especially as the boys were determined to help with everything. The big day arrived, set in a simple garden surrounded by close friends and family. The boys played important roles in every detail. Ethan carried the rings, Aiden decorated with flowers, Caleb gave an adorable speech, and Mason walked Sarah down the aisle. As Sarah and David exchanged their vows, it felt as though the past had finally been buried. They stood before a future they had built together, overcoming every obstacle along the way. After the ceremony, the whole family celebrated with loved ones. The boys ran around the garden, while Sarah and David danced together beneath the twinkling lights. He held her tightly and whispered, "I promise you, Sarah, I will make you and the kids happy every day of my life."
She smiled, her heart feeling lighter than ever, as if they had come a long way. "We've been through it all, David, and that's what matters." That night, before bed, the boys surprised their parents with a special gift, a scrapbook filled with drawings depicting happy family moments. On the last page, they had written in big, clumsy letters, "Our family forever."
Sarah closed the album and held it close to her chest. For the first time in many years, she felt that the journey, which had begun with so much pain, had led to something beautiful. A family built on love, patience, and the willingness to begin again. David and Sarah's story is a testament to the power of patience, love, and the courage to start over. Have you ever faced the challenge of healing a relationship or rediscovering lost trust? Share your story in the comments. Perhaps your experience can inspire and bring hope to someone else. If you find this story meaningful, don't hesitate to share it with friends and family, spreading the message of forgiveness and second chances. Thank you for supporting the channel. Please like, share, and subscribe to receive the latest updates. The stories are collected from various sources and do not represent any individual or organization. They are shared with the intention of spreading human values in life and have been rewritten with the support of AI. If there are any mistakes, kindly overlook them with understanding. Wishing you all the best in life.